Press the button, my friend.
The Out of Bounds Show is live from the Whiskey 61 Lounge in the Bank Plus studio.
Check it out.
Oh, I love it. Some of my text groups crack me up. Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, brought to you by the amazing wings and street tacos at Two Brothers in the Cotton District in Stark Vegas, Mississippi. Two Brothers, that's the place to be this weekend. That and Maroon and Company, maroonandco.com, as Mississippi State will host the Auburn Tigers Saturday night. But we're not going to get into that right now. The big news coming out of Mississippi State and Starkville this weekend was John Cohen taking the Auburn job. People expect it to be official later in the afternoon or maybe any hour now. And it really got the fan base all hot and bothered. Cohen has spent 15 years in Starkville, Mississippi. And he resurrected the baseball program. It was dead on arrival. Okay. And he had the worst talent in the SEC when he walked in, took it to the National Championship Series, made a really good hire in Canizero, made a good hire in Lamonis, made a good hire in Mike Leach, and some other good hires. And so I think all in all, I give John Cohen an A as the baseball coach and a B plus as the athletic director. Moorhead was a miss. There's some other things. John was never going to be a meet and greeter, work the room like Byrne and Strickland. Everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses, but he did some really good things. We welcome in Steve Robertson, who has known John Cohen for over 30 years, 247 Sports, Gene's page. And Steve joins us on the Yuengling Lager guest line. Steve, do you expect an announcement today of John Cohen officially taking the Auburn athletic director job?
Well, I think today is decision day one way or another, and that's the thing. Saturday, there were a lot of, let's just say the reports were premature on Saturday. I mean, I've got friends that cover Auburn. I mean, I've been in this business a long time. And so you get together and you compare notes. And then Saturday afternoon, it was pretty much maybe accepted on both sides. Hey, they're going to reach terms. There'll probably be an announcement on Sunday. Well, then that announcement didn't come on Sunday. And I got word early Sunday morning that it may happen Sunday, but it might linger into Monday or Tuesday. And then late yesterday afternoon, there was a little bit of doubt on the Auburn side that this deal is going to get done. And so now I think, now we're here. There have been some negotiations on both sides between John Cohen and Auburn. And I believe that we'll have a decision, either way. But on Saturday, it seemed like it was absolutely a done deal. And here we are now at, 9:30 on Monday morning, and it's not. And so there appears to be a little bit of concern over on the Auburn side.
Okay. I think Greg Sankey makes the call at the end of the day for the or has strong influence. And as you know, Steve, when John Cohen was the head baseball coach at Northwestern State, Louisiana, Greg Sankey was the commissioner of the Southland Conference. And then from there, John got in the league at Florida, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. And there's a lot of mutual respect there. And when Sankey highly recommends somebody, either all the time or 99.9% of the time it gets done. I think the Auburn media missed on what you're describing on Sunday. And I think that Sankey understands that they've been dysfunctional for a while. And somebody who's got a lot of credibility and experience like John may be the only one that can somewhat get them back in order. Your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe so. And that's the thing you think about. And let's be honest. I mean, we're not sitting here discussing trade secrets. I mean, Auburn, when it comes to these coaching searches, these AD searches, it's been extremely dysfunctional. And I joked yesterday, it wouldn't be an Auburn search without some drama over all this and some hurt feelings and things like that. I think you're right. It's probably, if you're Greg Sankey, you're like, you know what, we need to help those guys achieve some level of stability there. I mean, Jay Jacobs made some huge hires when he was at Auburn, and their fans absolutely couldn't stand him. It's like he hires Gene Chizik, who wins an Apple championship. And you may remember there were fans that greeted Chizik and Jacobs at the airport.
Oh, I remember.
It was crazy. And then he hires Bruce Pearl, and he hires Bush Thompson. Jay did a good job at
look,
Auburn.
Those two hires that you just referenced were outstanding. Bruce Pearl and Butch Thompson? Good grief.
But they didn't like him, though.
And Gus Malzahn did a super – look, any fan base, Mississippi State, all of these fan bases in our league have lost their damn mind. You know that. You cover this thing on a daily basis, Steve. I mean, Gus Malzahn did a hell of a job at Auburn, right?
Well, I don't know if I would go all the way there, but yeah, he had some big years. Obviously, I mean, you competed for national championships with Gus, but then you get to 8 and 4 years, and there was all this malaise, the Malzahn malaise, and that's the thing that I think about too is how would you like to be an Auburn Tiger and competing against the greatest dynasty in the history of college football right now? And that's a real challenge. And I think that's one of the reasons that donor culture is so toxic. And listen, that dates back to the Tuberville years where they're on the plane with Bobby Petrino when they're telling Tuberville that he's fine. They've upset the apple cart over there years ago. And I think that administration, more times than not, has catered to donors because they're afraid of losing that financial support. But, that's something if you're John Cohen, you got to think about. I mean, you're jumping right into the viper pit, going over there where everybody kind of understands that, the money guys make the big decisions. I think if you look at, John Cohen's history, he's never been a guy that has really kind of catered to public opinion. If he did, then you wouldn't have some of the hires that you've had. And you can debate the merit of some of those. I mean, a lot of people wanted Johnny Harris to succeed Big Schaefer. We're blessed with the gift of hindsight now. The Nikki McCray-Penson hire was awful. But, she also had to coach through a global pandemic and had some health concerns of her own. But, Johnny Harris went 10 and 15 last year in her first year at Auburn. So, who knows how that works out. But, I read some comments yesterday and people like, oh, yeah, well, look, our finalists when we hired Joe Moorhead were Chad Morris and Jeremy Pruitt and Joe Moorhead. I mean, what a great list. Well, Pruitt was good enough to get hired at Tennessee and Morris was good enough to get hired at Arkansas. At the time, those seemed to be good finalists. Of course, they didn't work out at their jobs. But to be critical of that final three, that's a little bit short-sighted. I mean, how many times has Mississippi State had the chance to hire somebody that went on to get hired at Tennessee and Arkansas? Not very often. But the reality of it is there's a lot of people out there. They're like, hey, this feels like the Scott Strickland situation all over again. We had, we thought we were really solvent with Dr. Keenum, who was one of our own, and John Cohen is one of our own. And now, John's entertaining some overtures from Auburn University. And so there's a lot of people out there that just feel like, hey, this is, on some sense, this is a little bit of a betrayal.
Why do you think, but you expect, you think this is a done deal to Auburn, right?
I expect it to get done. I don't believe that it is done. Matter of fact, last night.
I mean, he can't come back at this point, can he?
I think there's probably a path home. I think what you worry about, Bo, is, is he marginalized at this point? You know what I'm saying? It's like, can he come back?
How can you sell your vision after the last 48 hours? How can you get in front of a booster and ask him to, well, I'm just throwing out a number. Hey, John Smith, we want you to invest $7 million in our next Mississippi in our next football expansion. I don't. The path back would be, kind of violent, wouldn't it, Steve?
I think so. I think it'd be a real challenge. I really do. And you hate that, but that's the reality of things. I think, on Saturday when all these media reports made the rounds, if John had come out that evening and say, hey, listen, they were flattered by the opportunity, but my home is Mississippi State, I think people would have been like, yeah, man, look at this. Yeah, that's right. Auburn came to get him and couldn't get him. We're on the way. I think now that you're 2 days beyond that, and you say it's just 2 days, but I think there are a lot of people out there that are like, oh, man, come on. I mean, this just isn't right. And I think that's the issue you worry about is, how do you rally people behind you again, when you've had this situation where people's feelings are really, marginalized in many respects. People.
Why do you think he's making the move? What you mentioned, he's an alum. He had a hell of a run in baseball. He was one of the architects in landing the national championship. Why do you think now? Is it just 10, 15 years in Starkville, and that's the way that the Cohen and Stricklands and Burns operate? Can't stay somewhere too long, or is it something else?
No, I don't. There's not any scandal or anything like that, and that's what people always want to.
Oh no, I wasn't talking about it. I was just talking about another reason. I know there's not a scandal.
Yeah, but they've been here forever and a day, and listen, John's an ambitious guy, and then you see, what Scott Strickland and Greg Byrne have done, and I think maybe there is some of that. There's some ambition involved in every bit of this, and that's the thing when you get down to the brass tacks of the whole thing. There are a lot of people out there that are, kind of reaching the sunset of their careers and thinking, you know what, let me go try this, And so I think there is maybe, and again, I'm speculating, maybe it's a competitive type thing. It's like, you know what, let me go see if I can do this. Let me go try this thing on for size and see how we can, make this thing happen. But at the end of the day, and here's the thing, Bo, our loyalty is to Mississippi State. It's not to an individual, administrator, or a coach.
I couldn't agree more.
And so if somebody elects to leave the family, you wish them well in their future endeavors as long as it doesn't impact Mississippi State. But Mississippi State athletics has got to move forward with or without John Cohen. And I think that's that's the challenge for Dr. Mark Keenum today is, hey, you've got to go find somebody. I mean, State's only had 17 athletic directors in its history, and John.
And most of them weren't any good.
Exactly. And that's the thing I'm actually working on that I'm going to talk about that on my show today is, the guys that have been successful and the guys that haven't been, what do they have in common? And I agree with you. Hey, has John done some great things in Mississippi State? He absolutely has. Has he had some hires that didn't work out? Absolutely. But, it's kind of the cost of business in Power 5 athletics. I mean, nobody gets them all right.
No.
And a lot of people want him to wear that Andy Cannizaro thing. And, Andy at the time was considered the hottest name in the college coaching circles. And not to mention
if Andy doesn't bring in the talent he brought in that short period of time, Lamonis doesn't win the title.
Absolutely. Because Tanner Allen wasn't coming to Mississippi State. John Cohen recruited Tanner Allen personally. And Tanner Allen picked Andy Cannizaro and LSU over Mississippi State and John Cohen. That's the reality of it. And so then when Andy comes, he brings Tanner Allen with him. Where would Mississippi State baseball be today without Tanner Allen? And so you can say what you want to about Andy and his personal failings, but the reality of it is that was a good hire on paper. And, of course, when you have to fire somebody, and all coaches at some point are fired, there are very few of them that get to retire on their own terms. Even though that was John's first hire, that was a good decision. And when there was a problem, John acted expediently, fired the guy, and then went out and hired the guy that won an AFL championship. Yeah. So you got to give him some credit for that.
Steve Robertson, the Boneyard Podcast, 247 Sports Genes page. He joined us on the Yuengling Lager guest line. Expecting an announcement, John Cohen to Auburn today. There's been all this talk about money boosters not being happy at Auburn. They've never been happy. Okay?
Exactly.
There hasn't been one head coaching hire or athletic director hire in which these boosters have been happy. I think some of that is a little bit overblown. I think when push comes to shove and you have the absolute and total backing of Commissioner Greg Sankey, this thing was done several days ago. There was just a timing thing and maybe some minor contractual issues, but I think it's done. All right. Every athletic director, Steve, is under pressure in the Southeastern Conference because everybody wants to win out the roof, out the wazoo. How does, Cohen's hire, he'll hire a football coach at Auburn in 4 weeks or less. And, there's not a lot out there on the board with all the openings from last year, Steve. This is going to be interesting what John can pull off on the Plains if this all goes through.
Yeah, I think you've got to have a plan going in. Let's just be honest. You're not going to be able to just get up over there and, set up your office and, okay, all right, who we're going to hire. I think you've got to already have due diligence done. I mean, you can't go into this situation with Harsin and think, and we all knew coming into the year he was a lame duck and barring a dramatic turnaround. And the way that thing works, man, when the big donors, especially at a place like Auburn, when they're down on a coach, he's done. It's just a matter of time, before he's gone. And Harsin's a guy that was an interesting fit to begin with in the first place. And then you had all this attrition from the portal. So we knew heading into the season it was going to be a very difficult year for Auburn. They're picked 7th in the West, and they should finish 7th in the West. Well, at a place like Auburn, that's just not going to work. I mean, chaos is the kind of their currency, but they don't expect that in their football program. But they don't, if everything else is wild, but they're winning on the football field, they can at least find some way to kind of be comfortable with that. But this is a huge hire for Auburn, no matter who makes the decision, because, you had Gus Malzahn, going to bowl games regularly, but that wasn't enough because Alabama was winning championships. And then you go out and you have this very circus and carnival type atmosphere around your search last time. And, they were passing out bumper stickers that said, honk if you've been offered the Auburn job. I mean, they could not get anybody to take that job. And then they finally get Brian Harsin. And from the very beginning, there were people like, this is not going to work. And so Auburn, Auburn's kind of like LSU in this respect. You don't get to lose at football for very long and keep your job.
All right. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. What direction does Dr. Mark Keenum go as the next? All right, so here's where Dr. Keenum's gone. He promoted from within the last 2 times. So he hasn't really done, he's done many other searches, I'm sure, for EVPs and deans and VPs and stuff. So he promoted Scott Strickland from within and John Cohen from within. What direction does Dr. Mark Keenum go now?
I don't think they promote from within, and part of that too. And it's just no offense to anybody. I think with Greg Byrne, of course, that was a focal song promotion. Byrne was already in the building, and Byrne was already kind of creating some juice. And then so he leaves, and then Scott Strickland was already there. It's kind of a guy that was being groomed to take that spot should Greg leave. And so I just don't know if you have a guy like that. Of course, Bo Hemphill's been there forever and a day, and so Bo's a guy that knows Mississippi State. I don't know if Bo would want the job. I hadn't talked to Bo. But I don't think State promotes from within. I do think there will be somebody that Mark Keenum has a comfort level with. I think what makes this hiring process different than what we saw 7 years ago is that Dr. Mark Keenum has been the president of the Southeastern Conference, and then in addition to that, worked on the College Football Playoff Committee. And so as a result, his connections and the fishbowl in which he swims is much bigger today than it was 7 years ago. And so I think you're going to see him go out and get somebody that is maybe outside of the Mississippi State footprint per se. But I think there's a pool of candidates that are available to him today that maybe weren't 7 years ago. And, maybe Jared Banco is a guy, of course, that's done a great job there at Georgia Southern. Goes out and hires Ty Helpin, and I believe they're the ones that put the nail in the Scott Frost coffin there at Nebraska. And then they host a regional last year, and Banco's a guy that was the CFO of the Mississippi State Athletics Department. If you go with the guy that has real connections to Mississippi State, you probably go in that direction. But there are a lot of other very valuable, exciting candidates that I think Mississippi State will approach. And I don't think that's the thing, too, is you're not facing a coaching change in really any sport right now. So you don't have to rush this hire. It's not like the Auburn situation where they know they're going to have to replace Brian Harsin. So you've got to get somebody in place. I don't think it'll drag on, but Keenum can afford, I think, to take his time a little bit just because you don't have a lot of pressing athletic business at this point in the year.
Do you think Cohen will court Mike Leach to Auburn?
No, I don't think so. That's one thing that I'll say is when you think about Scott, and Scott's a friend, and Scott leaving was hard enough to deal with. But Scott, listen, it was a great opportunity. I remember talking to Scott after he took it. I mean, he never even let it get to a point for Mississippi State to counter. He just said, "Hey, listen, this is what I want to do." And Scott's an ambitious guy, and there's a lot of people that think that at some point he may be the SEC commissioner. And so, in order for him to kind of keep his career path going, he was going to have to leave Mississippi State. And so, but he leaves, and everybody understands that, and then he comes back and takes Dan Mullen. And the flip side of that is Dan Mullen was leaving either way. Dan was going to go to Tennessee. John Curry had pretty much had that deal done. People forget. We got the phone records around here somewhere if I could find them. It was already set up that the Tennessee plane was coming to pick up Dan Mullen the day after the Egg Bowl.
Yeah, and Steve, this. The Florida president said to Scott, do you think you can afford to have a coach that you have a relationship with beat the team that you're the athletic director of? And that's a fierce rivalry when the two teams are operating like they want to. You know the drill. Scott had no intention of hiring Dan until Tennessee, and he couldn't look at his board and say, Dan can go 3-1 against me at Tennessee, and I'd have to answer the question, right?
Well, not to mention, Scott Frost had gone to Nebraska and Chip Kelly to UCLA, and so Mullen was at best the third pick. And so, but with that, with that kind of in the background here, I don't think you'll see John Cohen do that sort of thing. I don't think you'll see John try to poach a coach. And I think maybe that's something he learned from watching Scott is like, to see the price that Scott has paid among the Mississippi State fan base. It's been unfortunate at times, but I get it.
I agree.
I understand the way they do. Fair, unfair, that's how people feel. I just don't think I don't think John wants to wear that.
Oh, that you should see my text line this morning. I mean, the vitriol towards Cohen is insane. I think just it continued to drag out over the weekend, Steve, and in this day and time when we all have access, through our phones, it's just felt like an eternity, and people are ready for finality today and to kind of turn the page and think about who's next. Do you agree?
Yeah. Again, it's like, I think people are like, well, this is going down. Let's get it over with, and then we can go ahead and begin the process. And I can tell you too, I talk to a lot of people, that's the thing, Bo, about life. You talk to enough people, you can hear whatever you want. But the reality of this is Mississippi State's already kind of started putting some feelers out there, about gauging some interest, who would be a valuable candidate. Because, Dr. Mark Keenum was back in Starkville yesterday, back in the office this morning. And so they got to prepare. Nobody's going to throw a parade for John Cohen if he leaves. You know what I'm saying? It's like Mississippi State has got to be about the business of Mississippi State, and they've already begun doing that. And so it's not like anybody's just kind of sitting around hoping they get a call back. They're already beginning to prepare for every possibility.
We'll leave it there. We'll bring Steve back on. Steve, this is my opinion. Because Auburn is dysfunctional and falling apart and a dumpster fire in football, this is, and we'll touch on this in a few days when we bring you back, this is a must-win for the Mississippi State football staff.
No doubt. Especially after what – you needed to win the game anyway, but after what's happened over the last couple of days, I think I would not be surprised to hear that Dr. Mark Keenum goes down to the practice field to address the team this week. I would feel confident that's probably going to happen.
We'll leave it there. Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Gene's page. I bet your site, I mean, y'all do well every week, but I bet it was insane starting Friday night or Saturday morning, right? Especially for a non-game weekend.
Yeah, but so Friday night I went to bed thinking, you know what it's going to be? I'm not even writing things Saturday. I'm just going to. And then, so I want to thank John and Auburn for giving me a busy working weekend. So.
All right. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show. Thanks, Steve. If you missed any of the show, go to Apple Podcast, search the Out of Bounds Show. Apple Podcast, search the Out of Bounds Show. Also, if you want to watch the show, you can go back on YouTube right now and search Out of Bounds Sports, or Facebook and search the Out of Bounds Show. Let's do lunch today, brought to you by Bulldog Burger, Lake Harbor in Ridgeland. Bulldog Burger in Starkville and Bulldog Burger in Tupelo. Lunch today brought to you by Bulldog Burger, Lake Harbor in Ridgeland. Don't forget Apple Podcast. Search Out of Bounds with Bo Bounds. See ya.